Is this the end for the trans community? Has this woman truly destroyed the gender ideology? Am I out of the job? Not quite. Though before we discuss things further, quick content warning for the following: transmisia, medical violence, and suicide. If you like our work, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on social media. Hey there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and it's time to laugh at some anti-trans bigots who seem to believe that they have found a way to destroy the transgender agenda. Today's comedy was brought to us by a gender-critical Twitter post sharing a Twitter video alongside the caption that, quote, "The amount of likes and comments agreeing on this woman destroying gender ideology makes me so happy," end quote. This video has been shared quite a bit by the looks of things, which, when coupled with the claim that it depicts a woman destroying gender ideology, might lead you to conclude that it contains some heavy brain power. Well, why don't we take a look?
How can you say that you feel like a woman when you don't know what that feels like?
Off to a disappointing start. This is just a loaded question that asserts the conclusion the bigot wants, i.e. that trans women don't know what being a woman feels like, as part of the question. That is an assertion without merit and can be discarded as a desperate attempt to sneak a bigoted presupposition past the viewer to make it seem like it's grounded. As for the question at the start, how can a trans woman say that they feel like a woman? The answer to that is quite simple, the same way you can. A trans woman has all the same cognitive faculties as you to figure out what it means to be a woman, and whether they feel that way themselves. Cis women are not part of some insect hive mind in which they share the same consciousness and compare notes on what it feels like to be a woman. You are just as alone as a trans woman on that question, meaning your answer is in no way more valid than hers. With that said, we can observe what happens when you deny a person their gender, with such attempts targeted at trans youth increasing attempted suicide from a baseline of 5% to a whopping 57%. With cis intersex people, it's a little more difficult as said torture is not typically seen as socially acceptable on them. However, we do have the failed experiments of John Money, a psychologist who set out to prove that gender was socially taught rather than innate and immutable, and that children could be convinced to live and identify as a different gender. To do this, he reassigned a male infant, David Reamer, whose phallus was destroyed during a circumcision, convincing the boy's parents to raise him as a girl, using David's twin brother as a control. Yet far from proving that gender could be socially taught, all Money managed to do was give David, a cis boy reassigned as a girl, gender dysphoria as he grew up to identify as a man. This was in spite of the fact that David was a naive participant. He had no idea he was reassigned as an infant. His father only told him when he turned 15, years after he'd already begun to show signs of suicidal ideation, just like trans youth pressured into denying their gender. Sadly, the damage Money had done to David and his family was so significant that it prevented him from forming familial bonds. David died by suicide on the 4th of May 2004. All of which goes to show that, just like trans people, cis people have some inherent sense of gender, and any attempt to force them to adhere to a different gender results in the same deep psychological scarring that it does trans people. How we know is much less important than the facts that we simply do, and that's all of us. So one question down, that just leaves 3 to go.
Why is gender everything but also nothing?
I'll take shit no trans person has ever said for £1 million, please. Gender is a lot of things, both in general and as specifically relates to what you're failing to talk about. So starting with gender as specifically relates to this, we are on about gender identity. That is the psychological component of sex. It is an individual's evolved perception of themselves in relation to others in their social group, traditionally male and female, yet as our species has evolved to become more and more cognitive based, allowing for more complex social interactions, so has our understanding of those roles. That, coupled with a lack of natural pressure, has allowed for a mosaic of gender identities to arise naturally as part of human diversity. So that is gender identity, at least in a relatively condensed form. From this we get gender expression, that is how the individual seeks to express their gender identity to others. The way we do so is heavily dependent on a number of factors, with one of the most important ones being social independence and free thinking. An individual who is less likely to adhere to social pressure is more likely to express their gender in an individualistic sense, deciding for themselves what it means to be a man, woman, or other, whilst those more likely to adhere to social pressure are susceptible to gender norms. Gender norms are the social expectations put on specific genders by society. Women wear dresses, men wear trousers, women are nurses, men are doctors, as a few examples. Gender norms don't typically prescribe certain expectations to non-binary people. After all, said norms are largely the result of patriarchal demands intent on keeping women out of certain areas, such as the workplace, sports, and politics. To justify doing so, they fall back on gender stereotypes, that is, prejudicial beliefs about men and women. For example, all women are weaker than men, all men are inherently aggressive, and all women are inherently maternal. None of which has any actual merit, but is how we as a society are brought up to perceive the world. Now, as a person, I only care about gender identity and gender expression. In fact, when I say gender, I'm referring to gender identity, unless I explicitly state otherwise, as with gender expression. When it comes to norms and stereotypes, however, they're nothing to me. In fact, they're worse than nothing. They're a negative in that they uphold the patriarchy and thus should be dismantled. So maybe that's what you mean by gender being everything yet also nothing. You've confused gender identity and expression with norms and stereotypes, lumping them all in together, when no, there's a clear difference. So that's 2 for 2, and I've gotta say, I still feel pretty intact. Let's move on to lucky number 3.
And if gender and sex are completely different, then how is a sex change gender reaffirming surgery?
I think you mean gender affirming surgery, not reaffirming. I think you got it confused with genital reconstructive surgery, which can be a part of gender affirming surgery, but it's not the same thing. As for sex and gender being completely different, who told you that? Yes, sex and gender are not exactly the same, but that doesn't mean they're entirely different. Allow me to explain using an analogy from my past life. All humans are primates, not all primates are humans. All gender is sex, not all sex is gender. On top of gender, sex also includes things such as your chromosomes, hormones, gametes, genitals, and secondary sexual characteristics. So they're not completely different, but there is a nuance. As for why I, as a trans person, hold gender to be the ultimate sexual factor, of the characteristics just mentioned, 3 of them, hormones, genitals, and secondary sexual characteristics, are things we have complete control over. Meanwhile, when it comes to gametes, they're almost obsolete at this point. The only thing left are chromosomes, which nobody genuinely gives a shit about. We're not born with genetic detectors that allow us to scrutinize people's genomes. They're just a way of genetically coding bodily functions, and sometimes that coding screws up. That's why a large part of the field of medicine exists. Meanwhile, not only can you not change a person's gender, a fact demonstrated earlier in what happens when you try, but gender actually plays an important role in day-to-day life, unlike chromosomes. That's why it's seen as good medical practice to support a trans person in line with their gender, because that is the only human response. Nature doesn't care how we do something, or even if we survive. Nature isn't moral, it just is. By the way, if you're wondering why I perceive gender as an attribute of sex, That largely comes down to the fact that I am a hard materialist. I do not believe in the existence of a soul or a spirit behind the human mind. Everything, including the way I perceive myself, is the result of purely biological processes that build up to an elaborate cognitive system. But that's just me. Others who believe in the supernatural may disagree entirely with my deduction. Not that any of this has any actual relevance to the latter half of your question, i.e., how is a sex change gender-affirming surgery, since sex change is merely the outdated terminology for what is now described as gender-affirming surgery. We don't typically flip between one or the other. GRS is just seen to be more accurate. As for why, it's because a person undergoing GRS isn't changing their sex, they're merely altering their physiological attributes to better match, or affirm, their pre-existing psychological sex. Hence, gender-affirming surgery. So that's 3 down, meaning you've got 1 chance left to destroy me. Let's see what you got.
And why are the gay community and the trans community all in one?
Because of history. Like, what's the purpose of this question? What do you think you're getting at? Allo-cis-het people didn't care if a person was gay or trans, they just saw a dirty degenerate who needed to be exterminated. In fact, one of the earliest contemporary LGBT+ communities to form was in 1920s Berlin, surrounding the Institute of Sex Research, founded by Jewish sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus advocated for those science had largely deemed taboo, including both trans and gay people, founding the Scientific Humanitarian Committee and World League for Sexual Reform to help him do so. And it's that idea of sexual reform that encompasses both sexuality and gender nonconformity. Indeed, the Institute in Berlin offered both comprehensive sex education and early forms of HRT on a sliding scale. Magnus even coined the term transvestite, what would later come to be transsexual and subsequently transgender. Then the Nazis happened. Hitler rose to power on the promise that he would bring an end to degeneracy, an imagined form of social decay he argued was created by Jewish people as part of some conspiracy to weaken German society. Hitler believed this to be responsible for, among other things, the loss of the First World War and the creation of the Weimar Republic. One of the people Hitler turned his sights on was, you guessed it, Magnus Hirschfeld. The Nazis raided the institute and seized its literature and arrested key members of staff. Magnus was thankfully able to escape, yet sadly died in exile, never returning home. The literature seized from the institute formed the bulk of the materials burned at public book burnings during the early Nazi rule, destroying most of the Western scientific literature on both gay and trans people at the time. One thing the Nazis kept a hold of, however, was the Institute's register, allowing the Nazis to round up its clients, both gay and trans, and force them into concentration camps under the Pink Triangle. That is why the Pink Triangle has come to be a symbol of the LGBT+ community as a collective, because we were all persecuted under it. And things are no different today. The anti-trans hysteria has paved the way for allo-cis-het people to openly paint all LGBT+ folk as sexual predators, particularly of children, labeling us groomers. Trans people were merely the most socially acceptable target that allowed them to reintroduce a level of homophobia to public discourse that had largely been relegated to the extreme fringe. Bigots do not care if you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans. They are coming for all of us. That's why the LGBT+ community stands united. That is the power of the union. You support me, I support you, whoever you are, wherever you come from, shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand. Quick note here, so I finished writing my script when Pinkwork Comics released this piece, perfectly demonstrating what I've just explained. This is how the LGBT+ communities feel. That's why we form what can accurately be viewed as a queer union, a collective of demographics traditionally viewed as sexually deviant. Also, yes, I have been sitting on the script for over a month. It sort of got sidelined with the whole Hossenfelder response. So with that, I just need to check and nope, I'm still feeling pretty undestroyed. In fact, I'm feeling pretty great. It's nice to be able to respond to questions like these, as their length limits the amount of bullshit that can be packed into them. Not that they don't try. Oh, they fucking try. This also acts as a good indicator of just how intellectually bankrupt the anti-trans movement is, that they're having to rely on the same rhetorical devices as frequented by evangelicals and young earth creationists. That's probably another reason I feel so great after responding to these. The whole thing takes me back to a simpler time. Though what do you lot think? Was I destroyed? Must I hang my head in shame? Or is it just another example of anti-trans bigots resorting to wishful thinking? Did I miss something you noticed? If so, be sure to let me know down below. Last thing I like to do is say thank you to everyone who chipped in to help me fix my camcorder. As some of you are aware, my camcorder has been on the fritz for a while now, turning itself off and on during recording, which is an absolute nightmare. Therefore, after spending 6 hours recording the Hossenfelder videos, which should have just taken 4, I decided to send it in for repair, and a number of you were willing to help pay for that. So again, thank you, it really means a lot. I did have it repaired before the previous Graham Linehan video, but with that topic I just didn't feel like it was appropriate to end the video by thanking people there, hence I pushed it back to this one. So again, thank you. And if you're someone else who appreciates what we do here and wants to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Gert Van Voorst, Hannah Banghart, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.